Okay, I'm back. I was sick with a cold for this past week, but now I'm almost completely back to normal. So I wanted to share with you a topic which I've been thinking about lately, which is the last 9 steps that Thor takes after his final battle. This is the battle that destroys him. And what's important is that he takes 9 steps. After he kills the world serpent, he takes 9 steps and then falls. So we assume that he's dead. But why 9 steps? What is important about that? Well, what we're going to talk about today is how the path of the shaman is one of mastery of the 9 worlds. And in order to achieve this mastery, we must first break the limitations that are keeping us in limitation. And whether you look at this as a spiritual breakthrough, as somebody who wants to break through into being more spiritually connected or more spiritually evolved, or if we're just talking about everyday stuff, trying to make it through life and running into difficulties. I can tell you that there are a lot of people, including myself, who are going through some fairly major life changes. I mean, maybe fairly isn't the right word. Extremely serious life changes where you feel like your whole world is coming apart, like you're coming apart at the seams. And what I want to share with you is that is actually what happens when the shaman is being initiated. Now, there isn't just one initiation into the path of the shaman. Life is a continual initiation. So you will go through multiple initiation experiences. Now, I don't care if you want to call it Kundalini awakening. I don't care if you want to call it enlightenment. I don't care how you want to look at it. Even if what it is just simply you're going through really difficult life issues. These are all opportunities for shamanic awakening. So we have within us 9 energy centers. The chakras, there are 7 chakras. There's actually 9, but we know of the 7, but there are 9 chakras. There are 9 points on the body, meridians that are used in Taoist meditation. There also happens to be 9 worlds of the world tree. And so, as you know, all of these things go together. The world tree is actually the human spine. And the 9 worlds are the 9 aspects of the individual on multiple levels. And so when Thor fights his final battle, he fights his final battle against the world serpent, and he kills the world serpent. He takes 9 steps and then falls and dies. But, as you know, this is all happening during Ragnarok, which is the apocalypse, the destruction of the entire cosmos. And we know from the Norse mythology that Thor himself doesn't necessarily die. What ends up happening is that his 2 sons and his daughter take his place. So he has 2 sons, Modi and Magni, and his daughter Thrud. And these words respectively are bravery, strength, and power. And so, as you know, even like with Odin, Vili, and Ve, there are 3 aspects to Odin, Vili, and Ve. There are 3 aspects to the human being. We live in a 3-dimensional universe. So what we're really seeing here is that Thor, who embodies all 3 of these things, when he defeats the world serpent, which represents death and restriction and limitation, when he defeats that, then he is transformed from his singular form as Thor, or Thunar, the Lord of the Mind, the Lord of the Moon, and he becomes now reduced to his 3 essences, which is bravery, strength, and power. So we'll get into all of that. But what's most important is to know that when you are going through transformational experiences, whether that be of an energetic nature or of a psychological nature or of just a nuts and bolts life situation, maybe a healing crisis, that when you overcome those limitations, what will happen is that life force energy, Thor, is going to step. And what happens when a giant steps on something? He crushes it. He destroys it. So there are going to be 9 aspects of your life that are going to seemingly be destroyed. And the way that you experience this is you experience this as a personal crisis, as a personal death. So there's no coincidence that this mythology is about the end of the cosmos. If we were to just talk about, oh, this is about transformation, we would go, oh, isn't that cute? But that's not what happens. You know, one of the biggest myths that's been perpetrated in religion in general for the past 2,000 years, but certainly within modern New Age ideas, is that, you know, enlightenment is just getting to this place of love and light, and everything is just sweet. And, you know, and what's really happening a lot of times is you've got people who are trying to hold on to themselves, and they're putting on this big smile on their face and acting like everything is wonderful while their whole world is coming apart. And so this is something that our ancestors understood. And all indigenous spiritual practices still understand. You know, that is why, you know, just for one example, Native Americans would do things like the sun dance, where they would, you know, they'd pierce their flesh with, you know, strings, and then they'd pull themselves around a pole, and they'd push themselves until they passed out. Or they would, you know, and this is found all over the world in all different kinds of spiritual practices, but you get what I'm saying. They would actually seek for that. They knew that this kind of transformation came with a lot of blood and sweat and tears, and if it wasn't going to come on its own, they would force it to happen. This is something that is happening today. The way that we see it is that there's this big push for people to use plant teachers, hallucinogens. And so people want to take hallucinogens in order to have this experience. In my experience, however, that is, although they can be very powerful and life-changing, that those experiences really are trying to mirror what happens internally within the body when you simply are able to harness life force energy. So I've experimented with all of these things that we're talking about to some degree or another. And what I found is that when you can get a hold of practices that get you connected to true life force energy, real, pure life force energy, you don't need anything on an external level. You can simply use these practices, and that is exactly what happens. All 9 aspects of yourself at some point come apart. This is why, you know, wizards would go off into the mountains, or they'd go off into the forest. You know, we see a little bit of, remember in that old TV series Kung Fu in the 1970s, where they would go into the temple, and they would, you know, put themselves through all these really drastic physical things in order to achieve enlightenment. These are all symbols of what actually happens when you are able to tap into pure, unlimited amounts of life force energy. The thunder god Thor, when you do that, this life force energy will come in and will literally step on and explode all of the 9 energy centers within you, will step on all the 9 aspects of your ego, your identity, and what you may experience is that your whole world is coming apart at the seams. Now, in the past, people would choose to do this because that's the way life was. The way life and the way energy was is that you had to work really hard, you know, through major feats of discipline and, you know, sacrifice and all this kind of stuff. in order to have the amount of life force energy necessary to blow open all of these 9 aspects of yourself. But nowadays it's happening to people whether they like it or not. See, ideally what should have happened is that, you know, if we human beings had been listening to the teachings of our ancestors from the beginning, we would have been following this path, and this shift that has now come over the world would be something normal. Might have been challenging for us, I don't know, but at least we would have known what it was, we would have seen it coming, and we would have people who would know how to help others be guided through that. But we live in a society now where we've been so disconnected from our indigenous spiritual practices that this shift is here. It's not coming, it is here. And what's happening is all aspects of our self and our world is coming apart. And so that's why you're seeing people freak out. Maybe you're one of those people. I know I myself am going through huge personal transformations, the likes of which I've never seen. And I've been doing this kind of work my whole life. So you're probably going through some of the same things. So we can either, you know, sit back and let it happen to us and let it drive us crazy to the point where we might, you know, try and hold on to the old ways of doing things, which is extremely destructive. Or we can accelerate the process. We can surrender to this power and allow ourselves to expand and transform. So we've just gone through this recent, here in the United States, I don't know how it's felt in other places, but we've just gone through this recent, what was that? The eclipse. We just recently went through this eclipse, and this eclipse was, remember I'm talking Vedic astrology. I can't tell you how many people, you know, are messaging me about some of these things and saying that I'm getting things wrong. I'm talking about Vedic astrology, East Indian astrology. There are some differences there compared to Western astrology, so some of these things are going to be different than the stuff you pick up and see in the paper. But according to Vedic astrology, this latest eclipse, Rahu, which is the north node of the moon, went directly through Leo and the nakshatra of Magha, which has to do with the ancestors. So what's happened is that the ancestors have been woken up. That's one of the things that happened with this this eclipse. The ancestors have been woken up. And so it's, you know, it's kind of interesting. We're heading into Halloween, which is where the veil between the living and the dead are the thinnest. But in ancient times, what it represented is the veil between the humans and their ancestors were very thin. And so at these times, there was celebrations and there were rituals to communicate with your ancestors. And what would happen is that the ancestors would download into you information within the span of, you know, it could be 10 seconds. But it would feel as though you've been speaking with them for, you know, months or years. That kind of amount of energy, information downloaded to you in this big chunk. That's originally what Halloween was all about, or that time of the year. In any case, this is what has been happening since this this eclipse. So what I'm going to talk to you about today is we're going to talk about the power of life force energy. I'm going to talk to you about what does this mean when Thor takes his last 9 steps, when he has this final battle with the world serpent. Who is the world serpent? What does this signify? And how can we choose to be a part of this shift? Because it's happening whether we like it or not. I'm sorry, I would love to sugarcoat it. There are some people that just get so bent out of shape when I start talking about how, listen, everything's changing. Our world is completely transforming. And people get very afraid. They don't want change. They don't like things changing. I'm sorry about that. I wish I could make you feel better. But the good news is that if you choose to be a part of this transformation, that then you can take advantage of this. And so maybe some things within you need to change, maybe some attitudes, maybe some actions, maybe some concepts, some beliefs need to be changed in order for you to be able to flow with this transformation. Because the only time that these kinds of transformations cause us difficulty is when we resist them. And so sometimes we need to be aware of the things that we need to let go of. And when we're able to let go of things, then we can flow through this. So it's interesting, I'm talking about this myth of Ragnarok, and all of the gods go through their various battles. And so I'm not going to talk about all of them, because we'd be here for a very long time if I did that. But today I'm going to talk about Thor's battle with Jormungandr, the world serpent. But one thing that I find interesting as I'm talking about this idea of, in order to really appreciate and get the most out of this shift that is happening to us, is that we have to let go of everything. We have to be willing to let go of, I mean, literally everything. And it's interesting because Ragnarok, which is the Norse apocalypse myth, the beginning of that, you have this ship, which is called Nilfar, which is the ship that's made from the fingernails of the dead. And what that represents is that as the last bit of resistance comes in, this is, if we're talking about personal transformation, that Ragnarok is a myth that actually has to do with energetic evolution within the human being, personal transformation on a major scale. Then the first thing that starts to happen is that we experience resistance. We try and resist it. How do we try and resist it? We try and hold on to things the way that they are. And what do we hold on with? Our fingernails. So one of the first things that happens as Ragnarok is beginning, as everything is crashing down around, is this ship where it has all of the, the giants and the ghouls and the trolls that are going to, be released upon the earth. They are in a ship that is made up of the fingernails of dead human beings. And it represents all of our attachments that we're unwilling to let go of. It's interesting that, one of the things that are dead on the physical body is fingernails. Fingernails are dead. And so, again, all of these, mythology, true mythology has within it seeds of understanding that if you really dig into it and you know what you're looking for, it will explain to you truths that cannot be just merely explained in, normal sentences. We have to look at it poetically, and then we have to understand it. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. So this is a Q&A. I have no idea if anybody's even on the channel. If you are, I'll take a look. I'm going to do a little bit of ads here for you, and then we'll get into any questions if there are any. By the way, this is a question and answer. If you do want to communicate with me, the best way to do that is to please leave a question. I know a lot of people want to wax poetic or philosophical, and I just pass by those and I look for the questions, because I want to help people with their questions about not only what we're talking about today, but anything else having to do with what I teach. So we are going to take a brief break here, and then we'll be back, and we'll either take questions or begin with the teaching. Okay, so I do believe that there was a couple of questions. We got a few people on. I know it's a Monday. It's a Monday early evening where I am, so who knows what's going on in the rest of the world. Okay, so Natalia Lokia says, "Good morning, teacher. Have a beautiful day. May your teaching be pure. Thank you." Okay, sorry, I thought that was a question. But welcome to everybody. Let me see about there. Question. Natalia again asks, "Does the symbol of Mjolnir, which is this guy, or this is one symbol, does the symbol of Mjolnir being worn upside down symbolize the protective intention of Thor, not only to mankind, but for mankind to itself?" You know, to be honest, I hadn't thought about that. I know normally it's worn differently than the way I have it here. But one of the things I find interesting is that, you know, a thunderstorm, when you look at a thundercloud from far away, it looks like this, right? It goes, you know, they call it a thunderhead here. So this could be one aspect of that. To be honest, I don't have the answer to that question, and I'm not aware of any difference, but I'm certainly open to that possibility. Emerson's Coffee, Bike, and Rum Shop asks, "Can women wear a Thor's hammer?" I don't see any reason why not. You know, the thing about Thor is, even though Thor is considered a male deity, he contains within him the complete unification of masculine and feminine. Because that's really what's happening when you think about anything having to do with storms, with thunder, with lightning, with that, you have within it the connection of yin and yang, male and female. You know, in order for lightning to strike, there has to be first a request from the earth. So we only see the lightning as it's coming down, but there's actually, the earth sends up an electrical current, which we don't notice, but it's that current that then is followed by the actual lightning bolt itself. So absolutely, women can wear it. I think they have as much connection to that as anybody else. I mean, they're the first cause if we're just talking about lightning. You know, that feminine energy has to then, you know, and this is true in general about energy and about life, is that in order for anything to happen, the first cause is always the feminine, always. You know, this, I don't know how this is going to sound to a lot of people, but when we're talking about mutual attraction, it's always the power of the feminine that reaches out first. And according to one of my teachers, the feminine power, if it's attracting masculine, what it'll happen is it'll reach into the third eye of the masculine and then get its attention. So anyway, women have all the power. The feminine has all the power. I completely bow to that power. I've certainly learned that firsthand when I've done energy work. Without the feminine, nothing can happen. Okay, so let's see if there are any more questions here. Keith says, "Can you explain what the knolls and nodes are again?" I don't know what the knolls are. Nodes, I think you're talking about the nodes of the moon. So the nodes of the moon, the north and the south nodes of the moon are, we're talking about astrology here, those are mathematical points. It would take a very long time to talk about it, but the shortest answer is that Rahu, the north node, has to do with your ambitions and your desires, your unfulfilled desires. So when I look at somebody's chart, where Rahu is always opposite of Ketu, and Rahu represents the person's desires that have brought them back into reincarnation. Ketu shows what the person has mastered in the previous life and is no longer attached to. So we could go on and on, but we don't have time to do that. Anybody wants an astrological reading from me, I highly recommend it. Go to astrology.thunderwizard.com. I can talk to you about how to maximize those things. Okay, so more questions. What is it about being born on a new moon that makes you leak energy? I don't know if you're asking me because you've experienced that or because you've heard me talk about that. I was born on a new moon. And so left to myself, if I don't do energy work, I start to leak energy, which means that I start to feel really dried out. I get really sensitive. I feel very brittle on all kinds of different levels. But the reason for that is because the moon represents life force energy. Here we're talking again about the thunder god Thor, whose original name is... So the moon represents life force energy, which is what Thunar is. He's the lord of electricity, of lightning, but we're also talking about life force energy. And so the moon represents that. That's why in all of the mythologies you have, like Indra in the Vedic Indra. If you don't know why we have differing phases of the moon, according to the Vedic mythology, Indra needs soma, which is his drink that makes him crazy. It makes him, crazy isn't the right word, it fills him and inspires him, and it gives him the power to conquer all of the worlds. And so that is held in the moon. And so what he does is he flies up into the sky and he grabs the full moon and he pulls it down, he wrestles it down under the ground. That is the moon waning. Then when he gets it under the ground, he squeezes it like a sponge, and he squeezes all of the soma out of it, and he consumes it, and then it slips out of his hand and it rises up again, and that's the moon waxing. And so that's where we get the dew. His name is Thunar. Dew, I believe it's the same word. When we walk out in the morning and there's dew on the grass, it's because Thunar, underneath the earth, has squeezed out the soma and it has risen up through the blades of grass or the flowers or whatever it is. So when somebody is born on a new moon, then there's all kinds of connections. There's connections to the mother. There will be an aspect where the person may not feel nourished by the mother. So they're constantly seeking that power from the feminine. But it also represents life force energy. So Qigong, energy work, whether it's breath work or whether it's movement, this has to do with the power of soma, the power of the ambrosial nectar, which gives immortality. So that's why I do this. This is how I became a Qigong master, is because I needed that. And as soon as I started doing it, it's just like it felt like, you know, my body was a sponge. It just soaked it all up, and it gives me a sense of peace and tranquility, as well as feeling nourished, as well as feeling loved, as well as giving me emotional balance and mental balance. These are all the things that the moon does, and this is what Qigong does. So again, I don't know if you're asking me because that's what you go through, or because you knew I did. So your next question is there a time in the moon cycle when you have peak energy? Well, yeah, of course there is. The highest energy is going to be the day before the full moon. But then you have this question here, what are other exercises you can do besides Qigong? So I don't understand why you would ask that. That's like saying, you know, here's this perfect food, take this perfect nutrient, and somebody says, oh, that's great, is there something else? I mean, Qigong, just by its name, just means energy work. So any other energy work you can do. Listen, I know what I know, and I share that. The best thing I can do for you when people ask for my help, the best thing I can do for you is share with you what I know to be the most valuable. And that's why I made this DVD. So I do want to talk about that a little bit. You know, again, I don't know you, Awake Maven, so I'm not necessarily addressing you personally. I have found that a lot of people sometimes will want, when they're presented with this, you know, by the way, Qigong is very easy to do. It's very simple. You know, it's just very simple movements, sometimes almost no movement at all, sometimes just taking a mudra and sitting and breathing. Very simple, so there's nothing difficult about it. But there is, I find sometimes people have a fear of it, and they want to do something easier. So there are other things that people can do, like, you know, let's take, for example, guided visualizations. Those are things that are very passive. Reiki, for example, is a really good healing technique, and I've had people say to me, oh, I don't need to do that, I do Reiki. And I'll explain to them that Reiki is not Qigong. Reiki definitely involves being a conduit, but you don't really get as much benefit out of it, personal benefit. Qigong is about filling yourself with energy. So, listen, I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't tell you guys what I thought to be the most powerful thing that there is to do. So, we're talking about the Thunder God. He loves to talk about this. I can guarantee you that if you want to get closer to the Thunder God, this is one very good way to do it. Okay, so moving on, Susie Jotun's wife asks, do you think the American heathen community will ever be able to progress towards Ragnarok being metaphorical versus a literal interpretation, especially regarding Loki? Do I think they ever will be? Yeah, but it might take hundreds of years. I don't have any agenda one way or another. If it happens tomorrow, that's great. But here's the reality, you know, about modern heathenism. Modern heathenism, as we see it, especially here in the United States, is a very recent phenomenon. And it's, you know, as anything that's new, it has to go through its infancy. But the other thing that is really important to know is that it is also built off of what came before it. What came before modern heathenism was 2,000 years of Christianity. And so what you end up with a lot of times, you know, I'm not talking about everybody, but a lot of times you end up with people who've come directly out of dualist Christianity, and they just simply want to paste it over with the gods, you know, so they turn, you know, they turn Balder into Jesus and they turn Loki into the devil, you know. So yeah, I think eventually, you know, if the human race survives, eventually people will you know, mature, you know, they'll grow up. But in the meantime, people have to do what they have to do, and, you know, little kids, you know, infants have to do what they have to do. They see things in two-dimensional perspectives. You know, again, this comes off of Christianity, which saw the Bible as being a literalist document. So the world was literally created in 7 days. Jesus literally rose from the dead. Jesus literally existed. You know, all of these things are taken very literally. So that's the mindset. People can't go into something blind out of that and expect to be able to understand things from a multi-dimensional perspective. So that's why, you know, one of the reasons I am able to, for instance, look at mythology and see exactly what it means is because I spent, you know, almost 2 decades learning from religions that had an unbroken connection to their prehistoric roots. Our ancestors were one of those. Our Northern European ancestors were very similar to the Vedic and the Hindu. In fact, they're related. And so if we want to understand what our ancestors believed, we have to go and study them. Even if we, you know, if we choose not to buy into any of that, that's fine. But you can't understand what our ancestors believed and how they functioned if you don't see what a belief system is that's run from the assumptions and the basis that is unbroken, uninterrupted. So anyway, I could go on and on about that. Do I think it'll happen? I do think it'll happen eventually. I don't think it'll happen overnight, and I think a lot of people in this lifetime won't get past that because that's, you know, people do the best they can. So let's see here. Again, looking for the the questions here. Okay, so Sirius B regarding Loki. I read that when invoking Odin, you also have to pay respect to Loki because both swore that neither would be served without the other. 1-2 says so in the Lokasena. Is this true? Well, I haven't heard that. I don't know that there's any problem with that. I don't have a problem with that. I personally don't feel the need to do that. You know, Odin is pretty self-contained. Another way to look at it is that Odin and Loki are two sides of the same coin, that Loki is the shadow side of Odin. Again, I'm not, you know, super religious about that idea either, but I don't think it's necessary to do that. But if you want to, you know, go ahead. You know, the thing about Loki is that, you know, you have to know how Loki wants to work with each individual. So for me, Loki has made it very clear that when I work with him, he has a very specific way that he wants me to work with him. So, you know, you gotta, when you're dealing with a figure like Loki, it's good to know that. You know, this is why, again, even though Loki is not an evil character by any means, in fact, he's the one that's most interested in human evolution, which is why he leads the army of, you know, the trolls and the giants in Ragnarok. He does that because he sees that it's time for the world and the gods to evolve, so he leads this army. I kind of forgot what I was saying. Anyway, you know, one of the things I do is when I do an astrology chart is I look at where Rahu is, because Rahu will represent where Loki is in a person's life. And that will give me a good idea of how that person should interact with Loki, or if even they should. Because sometimes you shouldn't. You know, sometimes you know, let him do his thing. Leave him alone. Because if he's decided that you're somebody that you need to be woken up and you knock on his door, he is going to give you a very powerful, liberating, but potentially challenging lesson. So, you know, I don't think it's necessary to invoke Loki at all. But having said that, I'm definitely, he's one of my best friends, to be sure. Okay, Delilah King. First off, I don't know if your chart is Vedic or if it's Western. So there's some pretty serious issues there. But I tend not to do Vedic readings because I want to look at your whole chart. So if you want me to look at your chart, I'd be happy to do that. Go to astrology.thunderwizard.com. I'd be happy to look at that. Yeah, so again, it looks to me like you might be talking about Western astrology, and I'm not a Western astrologer, so I can't help you with that. Okay, so let's see. Awake Maven says, for a Vedic reading... All right, so Awake Maven, you're asking about, do I need a more specific time? Yes. So, but say being born between 3 and 4 a.m., that's a whole 60 minutes. So here's one of the differences between Western and Vedic is that Western, the sign that you're given is your sun sign. And there's Vedic and Western also measure the sky differently, so your things could be in a completely different sign. But your sun sign stays the same for 30 days. So it's really not representative of your personality. What is representative of your personality is your rising sign or your ascendant. That changes every 15 minutes. So I can't, you know, so there are potentially 4 different, you know, major changes that could happen between 3 and 4 a.m. So yeah, I like to have it down to the minute. Because once you start opening up the chart and getting really, really exact, you have to have as good a time as possible. So yeah, Delilah, it's a Western chart, so it could be totally different. Everything you've said, you know, Taurus Sun conjunct, it could be in a completely different sign in Vedic. So I'd have to look at your Vedic chart. If you want a reading, go to astrology.thunderwizard.com. Okay, so Let's get back to the teaching. I think I've run out of questions for the time being. So now we're talking about Ragnarok. So again, what is Ragnarok? Ragnarok is the apocalypse myth according to Norse mythology. Norse mythology is representative of the pre-Christian Germanic, shamanic, tribal, polytheist, animist worldview. So what we see in these myths are going to be teachings that perhaps go back tens of thousands of years. What is interesting is that when we look at the Vedic mythology, now the Vedic mythology comes from the Vedic tribes, who, depending on who you talk to, came from somewhere north of Iran, and they migrated down into what is now Pakistan and northern India. And they spoke a language which was a different dialect of what the Germanic tribes spoke. Now, one of the ways that we know that they at least are connected linguistically, I'm not going to get into the whole racial nonsense because that's just a waste of time, but they were connected linguistically for sure, which says that they came from an original source culture, which if we follow it will go back 50,000 years, and we will find the original people who started this in somewhere in Eastern Africa. And they made their way up into the northern hemisphere, and they spread all over the map. And two of the tribes, or the tribal units, is we have the Germanic tribes and we have the Vedic tribes, and they have this very similar language, and they have this very similar religion. That when you know what you're looking at, you can actually see that both of these religions were spawned off of a deeper, original, older religion. And this is shown in the Germanic, because the Germanics actually tend to show an older source religion. I'm not going to get into why I've come to that conclusion, but it comes about by looking at the names of the gods and comparing them to the Vedic gods, and looking at those names and seeing how linguistically they line up with each other. And so what this tells us is that these myths may have changed over time as the language changed, maybe as the culture changed, but the core essence of these myths are the same. And so we have one thing that is true in both the Vedic and the Germanic mythology, which is the thunder god fighting against the serpent. And the serpent is seen as a force that is preventing life to thrive. And in the case of Ragnarok, we're seeing that the world serpent actually represents the last limitation that life force energy has to break through in order for life to evolve to the next level. And in Ragnarok, this evolution is very apocalyptic. It's very, it's this huge explosion, and the whole world comes apart and sinks into the sea, and then from out of it comes a new world. So it's a very intense, a very powerful, life-ending kind of a thing. And it's interesting that when we look at evolution of different species and life on Earth, we see this happen a lot as well. There will be a major apocalypse where, a giant asteroid hits the Earth and destroys, almost all of the life, and then from out of it, a new evolution of life will come. So it's representing that when we get to evolution, there has to be this cataclysm that we have to experience. Now, it may happen on a physical level. There might actually be a Ragnarok. I don't know. But it certainly happens on an energetic level, and it happens on a psychological level, to be sure. And so when we go through these things, it is everything that's being described here. But getting back to the connection between the Vedic and the Germanic. So in the Vedic, The thunder god is Indra, and as you know, the thunder god in the northern tradition is Thunar. He is the first cause of Thu, the first cause of the mind, the first cause of the moon, the first cause of the ambrosial nectar of life. And in the Vedic tradition, he is Indra. He is the king of the full moon. So Indra has, I won't get into it right now, but Indra is more of a solar expression of the thunder god, whereas Thunar is more of a lunar expression of the thunder god. And Indra has to fight against Vritra, which means the enveloper. And he is, Vritra is a dragon. He's a serpent. And he envelops the world. And we have the same thing in Jormungandr. Jormungandr is also the enveloper of Midgard, the earth. And so clearly we have a dual tradition that's coming from an original Indo-European tradition where the thunder god fights against the forces of constriction. Now, what is not said in the Norse mythology, I think, well, I could get into some beliefs I have about the Vedic versus the northern tradition, but in the Vedic tradition, Indra actually chops his head off and all that kind of stuff. So he technically kills him and defeats him, as far as I know, anyway. But in the Norse tradition, Jormungandr is not destroyed until the universe is destroyed. And so what we're looking at here is that the power of the thunder god, which is life force energy, which is also the force of expansion. And that's why Thor is half giant, because the giant realm in the east is the realm of ether, which is the realm of life force energy, but is also the realm of expansion. We have to have some kind of a check against that expansion, because if that expansion continues, then everything explodes. So without limitation, we can't function. But that limitation is actually trying to kill us. So we talk about that when we looked at the astrological stuff, and I talk about Saturn, and Saturn is the force of constriction. And again, there's no coincidence that the planet Saturn has a ring encircling it, because that in itself is the symbol of something, you know, surrounding our world. But the constrictions are necessary, because without it we can't function. You know, we can't perceive the universe without limitation. So we have to have this limitation. But life is constantly seeking to break past it, to see how far we can expand that limitation. But at some point there comes this breaking point, where when we break through that constriction, it actually creates a destruction. So what I'm about to say is going to be difficult for some people to hear, but without Jormungandr, the power of Thor would destroy the universe, because he is constantly pushing against restriction, which opens up the way for us to evolve. So that's why he is a god of the mind. That's why he's the god of, he protects human beings. He protects the earth. He's protecting the earth continually by pushing away that limitation on a mental level, on an emotional level. You know, it's interesting, I've talked about this before, but again, you have to listen to what I say very carefully. Those of you who know me know that I am not racist. I'm a universalist in that regard. In fact, I'm a warrior for that. I've said numerous times I could care less about people's skin color. I could care less about what happens to the races. All that stuff is just complete nonsense. But listen to what I'm about to say. I find it interesting that the Nazis wore the swastika. and then what happened to them. Because what they represented is that fascism represented constriction and control to the utmost, to the point where they would go out and find large groups of people to eliminate. That is the force of death, the force of constriction. And they wore that symbol on themselves. And what is that symbol? That symbol is the symbol of Thor, who is the being of expansion, who is the protector of the human race. Every human on the planet is protected by life force energy. Every human being, from anywhere. So Thor is the protector of all human beings. So when somebody puts on Thor's symbol of protection and expansion, and then acts in the exact opposite manner, that's somebody who's basically putting a bullseye on their forehead saying, come and stop me. I am the force of limitation, come and stop me. And that's what happened. And as horrible as that was, that reminder of what happened reminds us continually to be focused on the protection and the evolution of all of the human race. So anyway, I just found that interesting. It's a very uncomfortable subject to talk about because of all the garbage that's going on today. But we have this continuous battle going on between the forces of constriction and the forces of expansion. And when the force of expansion wins, because it always does, then what ends up happening is this. Everything comes apart. And so we have to have a complete destruction occur in order for the new life to come forth. The new life comes forth after the old has been destroyed, and it gets destroyed when it reaches a state where it can no longer stand the force of expansion. And so this is what Thor represents. And as I said earlier, even though Thor supposedly dies when he fights Jormungandr, he's actually just transformed into his three most powerful aspects, which are his two sons and his daughter, bravery, strength, and power. Power is his daughter, Shakti, that feminine energy. And the same is true with the other gods. The same, like Odin is transformed into his sons as well. Anyway, we won't talk about that today. But you may be going through this experience where you feel like your whole world is being torn apart. I'm going through it. Again, maybe someday I'll be able to explain what's going on in my life, and how I've barely been holding on. But I'm going through that experience where the force of expansion is literally blowing my life apart. And so it can be very, very challenging. And what happens is that when Thor, after he destroys, when he kills the world serpent, then he doesn't die immediately. He takes 9 steps and then falls. He takes 9 steps and then dies. Because he has this whole time, here's something that you may not know about what Thor is doing. What Thor is doing is Thor is continuously pushing against constriction, limitation, until it breaks. Once it breaks, then he is free to destroy all of the 9 aspects of you, the 9 worlds, in order to create a scenario where a new, more evolved being, a more evolved world can then erupt. So his whole existence is about getting to the place where he can be free to transform you in that very explosive way. In the meantime, while we're living our lives, and we're living our lives in this constriction, then he is our best friend also, because if it weren't for him, that constriction would kill us. In fact, everything that we point to when we talk about death is about constriction, limitation. On a personal and a psychological level, when we stay limited to our old ideas, our old attachments, our old habits, our old beliefs, and listen, I say this like it's easy to do, but it's a death whenever you let go of a belief. Like a really strongly held belief, it's a death. But if you don't, then those limitations, those beliefs, will eventually destroy you. They'll eventually kill you. And in my experience, I believe that this is the case when it comes to much, if not most, perhaps all of physical illness as a result of us on a psychological level holding on to limitations, whether they be emotional, psychological, mental. When we hold on to those limitations, we are left with only our reptilian brainstem, because then we are only in a survival state. And as you know, there are two major ways to deal with the survival state. There's fight or flight on the one hand, where you're going to either kill something or run away from it, or there's tend and befriend, where you're going to give up your boundaries, give up your ideals, give up your truth in order to be accepted by others. All of these are forces of constriction. And it is our job in this lifetime to continuously go through our life and identify. This is why staying in touch with your emotions is very important. Because from your emotions, you're going to be able to tell, what you're going through. So the other thing about this is that I keep wanting to say Jormungandr when I'm trying to say Ragnarok. When we go through our own personal Ragnarok, what is happening is that when we reach that place where we are about to evolve, what happens is that all of our limitations come out, and this is the war. So again, there's no coincidence that the boat that is made of human fingernails is what carries all of the giants and the trolls and the monsters. It's the hanging on by our fingernails. That's what brings it. And so this is something that has to happen. I mean, it's a really nice ideal that we can all just decide to be spiritual and let go of everything. Listen, I have nothing against that. We can make choices every moment to do that. But if you're a human being, there will come a point where your resistance will kick in and all of your monsters are going to come out. And, sometimes we win that battle and sometimes we don't. But anyway, this is what Ragnarok is about on many different levels. So, I'm going to go ahead and, again, do some more ads here and answer any questions you might have. So, just give me a second and I'll be right back. Okay, I'm back here, so let's take a look, see if there are any questions. Susie Jotun's wife asks, do you recommend learning both Western and Vedic traditions when studying astrology? Me personally, I don't recommend that. I don't know anything about Western astrology, so I can't talk about it with any real awareness, other than in my experience, what little I have used it has not been accurate. There are some major differences. Some people want to say, well, they're kind of the same. That might be true on a really deep level. I don't know. I can tell you that, you can look at somebody's chart in Vedic, and, planets will be in Cancer. And then you look at that same chart in Western, and those planets will be in Leo. And that's a huge difference. So, if we're talking about a science here, then, I'm just talking out loud. My understanding, one of them has to be right and one of them has to be wrong. My experience is that Vedic astrology is far more accurate. But more importantly than that, Vedic astrology has within it so many tools to remedy situations. I haven't seen that in Western. Western doesn't teach you, if you got this going on and that going on, here's something you can do to gather that energy or deal with that planet. So, my thinking, my apologies to any Western astrologers, why even bother? Why not, why drive a 18-wheeler on an obstacle course when you can ride a motorcycle? Why not pick the one that works best? So that's why I do it, and I specifically went after learning what I learned, not because I had no intention of becoming an astrologer. I did it because I have a lot of issues, and they're in my chart, and I needed tools to be able to overcome those. And so Vedic astrology was the one that gave me mantras, that gave me rituals, that gave me understandings about how to deal with the powers of certain planets, to empower certain things, and all that kind of stuff. So that's what I teach. I only teach what has worked for me so that people can make their lives better. So again, if anybody interested, go to astrology.thunderwizard.com. So let's see. Susie Jotun's wife asks, so you believe Indra and Thor are the same being? Yes. So Susie, you're probably fairly new to my channel. Go on to my channel. I talk in depth about Thor and Indra and how they're connected. I've written about it in my books. So I strongly recommend, again, just let me make a statement to everybody listening. You are doing yourself a disservice if you do not go onto my channel and start watching the videos that are on there. There are hundreds of videos on there. Some of them have stuff in there that is invaluable, that you can't find anywhere else. I know that YouTube really likes to keep you distracted at, whatever, grabbing your attention. But, just about any question you have is going to be answered in one of my videos somewhere. So I would recommend getting some popcorn, sitting down, and binge watching my channel. You'll understand so much more. But having said that, thank you for the question. And I'll just very briefly right here, just look at the words. The key word for the thunder god in the Vedic and the Germanic is the root thu. Thu means drop of water. It means drop of ambrosial nectar. It means the moon. And so that it means dewdrop as well, which is ambrosial nectar. So with that root, is also the root of the word thunder, obviously, thu. With that root, you can then create a name. And you see in here, in the two gods, that the names are built off of that root of ambrosial nectar of thu. In the Germanic, it's thunar. And the Vedic, it is Inthura, Indra, Inthura. That's not a guess on my part. That's also bore out in, again, here are some things that You know, somebody asked about modern heathens. These are some things I'm going to share with you now. You cannot learn just by simply deciding to become a heathen after being a Christian and then picking up the myths and trying to learn. Some things you just can't pick up unless you've learned certain things. So for instance, because I spent a lot of time in Vedic mantra science, one of the things that I learned is that there are these sacred seed sounds that the Vedic masters will tell you are nonsense syllables, meaning they don't have any translation into language, but they contain power. So the seed sound for the word, the seed sound for one of the powers of the moon is Thu. The ambrosial nectar of the moon is Thu. Now, they will also tell you that that doesn't mean anything. But what's really going on is that the Vedics themselves, even though they have the tradition, and they've kept a tradition, an oral tradition. This is why you're not going to get anything by looking on Wikipedia or picking up a book. You actually have to go and train with some masters who have this knowledge that's backed up for thousands and thousands of years. They can say, oh yeah, the seed sound for the moon is Thu, right? But they'll say, yeah, we don't know what it means. It's a nonsense word. It's not a nonsense word. It's a very, very, very old Indo-European root word for the ambrosial nectar. And that is why the god Thunar, his name is Thunar, that's why his name is Thunar. That's why Indra is Inthura. That's why the word is thunder. Because of that root. This is a science. So if you understand this science, then you can trace it back to what it really is. So again, that's another reason why, you know, and I've, you know, I don't do it anymore. I don't even bother with you know, trying to connect with that world anymore. But I remember, you know, just getting hammered by people saying, oh, that's different. The Vedic is different. And I'd say, how is it different? It's on the other side of the world. They speak a different language. They're a different race. You know, so that's why it is the way that it is. If this science is to survive, which is why I'm here. The reason that I'm here is because I want to bring out the science of this so that people can take this, and I'm trying to gather all of this scientific information. Science, by the way, means knowledge. I'm not just talking about, you know, physics and building cars. Science, scientia, means knowledge, body of knowledge. I'm bringing this body of knowledge and synthesizing it so that people can take this tradition and build upon it. It is my absolute belief that my job is to do exactly that. I am not going to be the ultimate master of this. I barely scratched the surface of what I've gathered together. I already have students who have only been working with me a short time who have already uncovered secrets about this that I didn't see. But they've taken the information that I've given them, and then they have then made their own discoveries. It is my belief that this thunder path, as I call it, is going to be a legacy that people after I'm gone will take and continue to build upon. And it could very well be the place where all of the ancestral teachings can come together. You know, we can find them, finally interlock them together, sort of like, you know, the what is that, you know, those robots that come together and create like other new things, whatever, however you want to call it. The whole is greater than the sum of the parts. So anyway, enough about me. So let's see, I'll see if there are any more questions, and then I'll talk about what the 9 worlds are and what they represent. Okay, looking at the looking for the questions. I understand your views on race, but what are your views on castes? Same thing. You know, the original caste system was not about people being stuck in a caste. It was about people cooperating together. So, yeah, that was misunderstood. You know, listen, that old stuff about using castes and all that, listen, that's been, let's just get honest here, okay? The only reason anybody wants to, you know, and I don't know you, So I have no idea where your stance on this is, and frankly, I don't care. It's none of my business. But the only reason people care about that is because they've got some kind of exclusionary, fear-based belief system. They want to use race, or they want to use religion, or they want to use caste in order to make somebody superior to others. This is nonsense. People having, being given certain powers and abilities in order to choose to live a certain way, that's different. And that system, anyway, no longer functions. Even when it did function years and years and years ago, it doesn't function anymore. So it's time to drop that stuff. So that's my belief on that, since you asked. All right, so let's keep going. So now, since we're talking about destroying limiting patterns, let's talk about how that exactly is going to be done. So, what I want to do, I'm having a kind of a traffic jam in my head because there's a bunch of things I want to do. So, Thor, after he destroys limitation, and who is Thor? Thor is the Lord of the Mind. Lord of the Mind meaning that part of the human nature that evolves, that thinks independently, that becomes something new. This is what his whole purpose for existence is, to die in that way. He's seeking every moment to try and expand himself to that point where he can cease existing so that he can transform, but also he's doing it for us so that we will transform. And so he takes 9 steps. And so what are those 9 steps? Again, why would that be there? Is that there just because 9, does it sound cool? He takes 9 steps. It's obviously there for a reason. So we know that Thor is life force energy. We know he's the force of expansion. We know he's the force of evolution, especially when it comes for the human mind. So the human being is made up of 9 aspects, which we see in the 9 worlds. So are you seeing the connection here? I'm a thunder wizard. What is the main tool that I use? The thunder wheel, which is what I just showed you, which is the 9 worlds, the 8 directions with the hub in the center, which is Midgard. And so what that means is that when Thor destroys limitation, he's going to destroy all of the 9 aspects within ourselves. All the 9 worlds will be destroyed. And so what do the 9 worlds represent? The best way for me to explain that is, I won't do that today because we don't have time, but the best way for me to explain that is in this book, which is also a DVD. Thunder Shamanism, the Indo-European Medicine Wheel. It's also on the thunderwizard.com channel. By the way, if somebody really wants to learn this stuff, as well as support this YouTube channel, go to thunderwizard.com and subscribe. And if you subscribe, I think it's the 2nd or 3rd level, and it's only $25 a month. Again, I'm a little flabbergasted that people come to me and say, I can't afford to subscribe right now. Really? You can't afford $25 a month? Really? I have a hard time believing that. Anyway, at that level, you will get private videos where I go in depth on what the Thunder Wheel is. I go in depth on how to make use of that. In order to best make use of that, there are the study materials, which are the books and DVDs. And so I tell you which books and DVDs that you need to do that. But there's a couple here which will be helpful. If you want to know how to begin the process of opening up the 9 worlds, not only in your Thunder Wheel, but within yourself, we've got this DVD series here. It's called Medicine Wheel Qigong, but we go into the 9 worlds of the Norse world tree. So I'll talk very briefly about what that is right now. So we've got the 9 worlds, And if you're using the thunder wheel in ritual, like for either the medicine wheel qigong or for the, where is it? For the spell of the 9 knots. I'm going to get into that in a second. In order to use that, you need to know how to use the thunder wheel. So the thunder wheel has these 9 directions here, counting the center. And so what Thor does when he dies, after he destroys limitation, is he steps on each of the 9 worlds, blows them up, just like balloons, just blows them up, destroys their limitations so that they can evolve. Within the human being, we have 9 centers. I know you've heard of the 7 chakras, but there are 9 centers in the human body. And I won't get into that, but they are the root, the perineum, the sacral center, the navel center, the solar plexus, which is not the navel center or the heart, by the way. Really frustrates me when people call the solar plexus the navel or the heart. Solar plexus is right here beneath the heart. Between the navel and the heart is the solar plexus. And then you have the heart center, which is where the soul resides. And then you have the throat. And then here's one that a lot of people miss, the mouth. The mouth is also an energy portal as well, the third eye and the crown. Those are the 9 major energy points within the body. And so when we work with the 9 points of the body in the spell of the 9 knots, what I'm doing for those of you who have done it, who have done that particular ritual, what's happening is you are kind of giving permission to Thor to step on all of the 9 worlds within you. You work with all the external 9 worlds as well, and then you set your intention. And so that's what the spell of the 9 knots is all about. It's about taking you out of the fixed limitation of your life where it is. And by literally exploding all of the 9 worlds, destroying, creating a little Ragnarok for yourself, then you destroy all the limitations so that you can create something more evolved, better for yourself. So a lot of people, this is why as opposed to say like mantra ritual where you should do that every day for a minimum of 40 days, or do it every day just for the sake of doing it, because it sort of keeps you going, it keeps everything in balance, it keeps you empowered, because if you've worked with me, I've told you which planets you need, which deities, which mantras, all that, so that you can function at your best. But when you do a spell of the 9 knots, you're sending a message to the universe that, hey, I need a mini Ragnarok here. I need to destroy my limitations because I want something better. I can't make it happen. I can't think it into existence. I need help. And so you're using that power of life force energy to destroy it. Now, when this is probably one of the most valuable things I can teach anybody. When you combine the celestial qigong or any of the qigong that I teach with either the mantra ritual or the spell of the 9 knots, you end up taking something, like conventional weaponry and turning it into nuclear weapons. You end up increasing the power exponentially. So this is the power of Thor. So a lot of people, if you really want to worship Thor, in my experience, you've got to do life force energy work. You have to, because that's what he is. He is life force energy. He is the magnetic force of the universe. He is the power of lightning. You can't do anything without that power. That fusing of yin and yang, which creates that explosion of life force energy. So we can talk about each of the 9 worlds. So let's go in let's go in clockwise formation, because when you do the spell of the 9 knots, this is what you're doing. You're asking each one of these worlds to be destroyed and recreated. So when we start in the north, we're dealing with the root chakra. And so the root chakra represents literally your physical security, your stuff. So the first thing that has to happen when you go through this transformation is that you will let go of all of the limitations and the attachments to the stuff. Like, for instance, I'm 54 years old. I just turned 54 yesterday. Happy birthday to me, by the way. I'm 54 years old. Now, the typical person at age 54 should have kids and grandkids and should have a big house and a big mortgage and should be getting ready for retirement. And blah, blah, blah. Now, if I were to live in that, I could definitely talk myself into a very serious depression, because I don't have any of that stuff. Now, I don't want any of that stuff, to be honest with you. I've had the big house. I've had the big 2-story, 5-bedroom house with all the stuff. I've had all that. And I live now in a really wonderful little studio house. It's a house. And I have my own little garden surrounded. It's really beautiful. So I live in a little wizard's house in the back of a property here. And so in order for me to have this, to be able to do what I'm doing right now, and to be able to have the freedom, and you've heard me talk about the health that I have and all the stuff that I didn't have when I had all the stuff, the first thing I had to do is I had to let that part of my attachment get blown to pieces, which meant I was this close to homelessness. I won't get into that. It's a whole other story. I've already talked about it. But that's the first thing that has to go, is we have to let go of, we don't have to let go of anything. We have to be willing to have life force energy come and obliterate our understandings. Now, it doesn't mean you're going to end up without stuff. It just means you're going to end up getting rid of those things that are limiting you. For instance, I can pick up and move whenever I want. I can pick up and move to another state. I can move to another country. I can take my business with me. I don't have anything to hold me back. But so I could look at that and get really stoked about that, or I could look at what other people have, and at my age, and what I should have, and I could get really wrapped up in that limitation. So you have to let that be destroyed. So that's the first one. We'll keep continuing on into each of the worlds as we go. I'll see if there are any questions as we're going here. All right, so all right, I'm quiet because I'm looking for the questions. I don't see any questions just yet. Let's see. No, I'm not finding a question. All right, let's see. Did I see a question there? Okay, so again, if you want my attention, the best thing to do, because a bunch of people are talking, put question before your question, or put question mark so I can see it. I almost missed this one. Alan H. says, does Thor strive to expand, stretch the borders of the mind, or does he just defend them from destruction, contraction? No, he wants to expand it. He is looking to expand your mind. He is looking to help you evolve. Now, in the process, he's doing both at the same time, but in the process, he is keeping the forces of constriction away so that you can live in the moment. So sometimes, again, and it's like, my experience is that, you hit a plateau, and the plateau is like, it's stretching and stretching and stretching until it gets to a point where it can't stretch anymore and it has to break. And then you go to the next level. And so while things are growing and expanding, you may have an experience of feeling good and things are going well, and then you get to that limitation. And then the resistance comes up. So you have your own personal Ragnarok, where all of the resistance comes up to say, no, keep things the way they are, don't change, don't change. And that's the toughest part, because it's really hard to know what the truth is. It's It's really difficult because, you know, our mind is trying to protect us. Those limitations are also there to protect us. So they're both here to protect us. This is why, you know, I'm using this picture here of, you know, there's this constant tug of war between Thor and Jormungandr. For those of you coming late, Thor destroys Jormungandr, the world serpent, at Ragnarok, and then takes 9 steps and dies. And what I'm saying is that the force of life force energy, when it no longer has constriction, which is what keeps the balance of this universe is held together by this force of expansion and contraction. And Thor being the force of expansion, which always wins in order to evolve. When it gets to that point and that expansion hits a place where something has to give, then it gets destroyed. So whenever we go through a transformation, which we are all doing, the whole world is going through a major transformation energetically. Huge. And so we are, if you're flipping out, if you feel like your world is coming apart, it is. This is what happens when you evolve. This is evolution. And you can either choose to be like the forces of darkness, the forces of chaos, and ride the boat of human fingernails, hanging on by the fingernails, or you can submit to the force and ride with the force of Thunar, the force of expansion, and evolve. And so the first world we talked about, which is in the north, which is the root chakra, which is all of your belongings, all of your stuff, all of your security. You have to let go of that. You have to be willing to have all that taken from you. And then the second is the northeast, That's the fort of the gods. So if I'm right, and I'm willing to be wrong about this, but if I'm right, and this is the path, these are the steps of Thor when the world is destroyed and we evolve, the next thing that will happen is your religion will also be destroyed. Because Asgard is the fort of the gods. Now the celestial gods are very rigid in their thinking. They're very stubborn. They're like children. They're very two-dimensional, which is why they live in a fortress. They don't want things to change. They don't want their perfection to be sullied in any way. This, by the way, is why a lot of the the conservative, I say that in quotes, the conservative oscillatorers, this is why they're so into the Aesir. And they're not into the Vanir or anything else. They're so into the Aesir, and that's why they tend to be politically very conservative, because like the Aesir, they think in two-dimensional terms, and they see things in right or wrong, good or bad. So the second thing that will be destroyed will be your concept of religion will get blown apart. Now, a lot of people, their identity is really wrapped up in that. Mine was. I was a born-again, severely, like, hardcore born-again Christian in my late teens and early 20s. I went to Bible school and studied the Bible in Greek and Latin. I went on the street and preached. I did exorcisms and all that kind of stuff. I was seriously hardcore. And then there came a point in my life where I lost that. That my understanding of the universe and religion blew apart. I didn't walk away from Christianity because I didn't believe it anymore. I walked away from it because I could no longer respect Jehovah. Because I could no longer respect a God who would arbitrarily throw people into a place of eternal torment for simply being mistaken. I mean, I couldn't live with that. I couldn't live with myself and worship that deity. So I left Christianity because of that. I thought I was going to go to hell, and I said, well, at least I'll have my integrity. Now, since then, obviously, my beliefs have changed. But my whole world fell apart. I mean, that was one of the most difficult periods of my life. My whole identity was wrapped up in that. And when I lost that, it was, I had nothing. So that's the second thing that goes. And again, you may not have that on the same degree that I did. I'm just walking through the 9 levels of initiation. As Thor steps his 9 steps after destroying the limitation, these things are going to be destroyed, and then they're going to be recreated. So as you can see now, I have a very clear religious understanding, spiritual understanding, although it's very different from what it was. But I certainly wouldn't have the belief system I have now if I didn't let that one be completely demolished. So that's the second world, is the Northeast, which is the realm of Asgard, which will be your sense of spirituality, your religion will be completely obliterated. And then you have to recreate it again. So what's the next world? So the next world is the giant home. So as you know, if you have been working with me in the Advanced Shamanism course, which is at thunderwizard.com, we've been talking a lot about the rune wheel and using the runes in the thunder wheel and all of its signification. So there are 3 runes that live in the eastern direction. And those are the runes of the personal identity, the ego, if you will. So the next thing that Thor is going to step on, as he's taking his 9 steps away from Jormungandr after destroying your limitations, the next thing that life force energy is going to do is he's going to destroy your understanding of who you are. So you will have to go through a personal death, a death of ego. Odin went through this when he discovered the runes. He sacrificed himself to himself. He died to his own limited ego. He chose to do that. I talked about that in the beginning, that there were some cultures, like we know, I don't know this firsthand, but, read about it, seen it in movies, whatever. Who knows if it's true or not. The Sundance Native Americans, where they would, pierce their flesh and they'd pull against that rope and go in circles around the pole until they fainted. And then they would have an experience, or they would have a vision. They're seeking to destroy their self, their identity. Well, when you go through a shamanic initiation, it happens to you. You experience it as you're coming apart at the seams, you're going crazy. I'm getting a lot of people contacting me about this very thing, wanting my help. So I know I'm not the only one. I know there's a lot of other people going out there. So it makes it a lot easier if what you understand is that, no, this is the sign of initiation. You feel like you're dying, but what's happening is your limited understanding of yourself is being blown apart, being destroyed. Okay? All right, so I'm now going to take, again, a short break, turn the lights on, and if there are any questions, now's the time. I will answer your questions. We'll just take it from there. I'll see you in a couple minutes. Okay, welcome back. All right, so I had to turn the lights on because it's starting to, the sun's going down here in Southern California. All right, so I don't know if I saw a question here or not. Romneon Germany says, destroying yourself or dying to the ego sounds a little poetically saying to reincarnate. Well, reincarnation is certainly that, but that's not specifically what I'm referring to. I'm referring to an actual death of the ego, a death of your identity of who you are, where you don't physically die, but you go through an emotional, a psychological restructuring. So the shamanic initiation, this is one thing that all shamanic cultures and traditions teach, is that the person, when they're called to be a shaman, lots of times they are seen as being crazy, they're insane, or they're seen as sometimes they'll have a physical illness and they'll die. But there's this symbology of when the shaman dies, either through physical death or through a psychological vision or something like that, they will see themselves being taken apart. Sometimes they're chopped up into pieces and then put into a vat of boiling water, and then the gods pull them out whole again, which means that they're dying to themselves and then getting reconstructed. So this is the third step. The third step of Thor, as he destroys limitations, is he steps on your ego. Bam. And your ego gets destroyed, only to be reconstructed again. So we can have this experience multiple times throughout our life. It doesn't have to be reincarnation. It can be death and resurrection. But specifically, I'm focusing on a shamanic initiation. And I believe that a lot of people, if not the whole world, is going through this kind of energetic shift, which is a shamanic initiation. And a shamanic initiation is nothing. It's not nothing. It's very real and it's very serious. And those of you who have gone through it or are going through it know this is not, a walk in the park. But it's important to have the tools to be able to go through it. And at some point I could talk about, the Kundalini, because that's in there as well. What I'm specifically talking about now is life force energy going in and destroying the 9 aspects of ourselves. But there's also the tree Kundalini, which is the spinal column, the tree of life. Yggdrasil is the spinal column as well, and talking about the rumbling of the tree, and then the tree bursts into flames. And this is the Kundalini awakening in the psychological, emotional realm. So we've got both of these happening at the same time. And one thing I didn't mention, which I should, is that even though Kundalini and life force energy are 2 different energies, they are intertwined. And they do work together. So one of the things that can be done, people spend a lot of time doing Kundalini work. And I suppose that's one way to do it. I myself prefer working with life force energy, because if you're just working with Kundalini, you can have all kinds of nervous system experiences and psychological experiences. But if you don't have the life force energy to back it up, it can be really drastic and painful and frightening. And so when you put the 2 together, then when you start working with life force energy on a consistent basis with, a specific science like the Qigong that I teach, then what ends up happening is that the energy will get to a point, the life force energy will get to a point where the Kundalini can then rise that much more gracefully and freely, as opposed to this, where you start out just working with your Kundalini and then there's this 3-stage explosion here. So anyway, the point is that these things work together, and being the thunder wizard that I am, I like to work directly with life force energy. So that's the third step. Again, at Ragnarok, after Thor destroys the world serpent, he takes 9 steps and dies. This represents the 9 steps of shamanic initiation. That when life force energy you have reached your capacity, and you can no longer stay in that particular identity or whatever it is, it will explode. And then Thor takes 9 steps before he dies. So, okay, I'm looking at questions now. Susie Jotun's wife asks, is this what is called shaman sickness? It crosses over and can become physical. Well, I don't know what shaman sickness is. I've never heard that phrase before. I've heard of Kundalini psychosis. I've heard of chi sickness. But the truth is that when people go through shamanic initiations, if they're not working with a qualified shaman, if they're just out there by themselves in this completely irreverent society that doesn't revere what happens, just because our society doesn't recognize, what our ancestors knew doesn't mean it doesn't happen. It still happens. Then you're going to feel like you're going crazy, or you might actually go crazy. So, you know, that's just one of the sad facts about where we live. Let's see, Susie Yoten's wife. Is it possible to fry the nervous system? Yeah, absolutely. This is not going to be popular, but teacher plants, hallucinogens will completely fry the nervous system, because you're forcing an externally, superficially generated shamanic experience onto your nervous system, and it can fry you. That's, you know, anyway. That kind of stuff should only be used very sparingly, and should only be done under the guidance of a master shaman, and it should only be done when nothing else will work, and only because then it blows open your chakras and your nervous system so that you can have an experience. Once you have that, you're then supposed to take that and then go experience that on your own. But I'm telling you, you can do that without any of that stuff. That's what this stuff will do. This is far more powerful than any external agent you can ingest. And I'm telling you that from personal experience. That's not just my opinion. Okay, so is there any more questions? No. Okay, so let's keep going through the worlds. So when Thor defeats Jormungandr, and that is the destruction of limitation, when life force energy destroys limitation, then he steps on the 9 worlds and destroys each one of them so that they can be recreated. So the first 3 is the root chakra, which is all of your stuff, all of your security. Your ideas about security get destroyed. Then comes your belief about religion, because we're going in a clockwise fashion from north to northeast. Northeast is the realm of Asgard. Asgard is the celestial fort of the gods. So your understanding of religion gets destroyed. Then we go to the east, which is your identity, your ego. Your ego gets destroyed as well, and you go through a death of the ego. Then we go to the next one, which is which world? The dwarf home. So what happens when, so you see where this is going here, because tell me if you haven't known people like this or been like this. People get attached to their stuff, the root chakra. In order to preserve their stuff, they seek God's blessing, so they become religious. I've seen this in my life, where people that I've grown up with who were total rebels until they hit whatever age it was in their mind that they thought they were becoming adults, like they wanted to get married and have kids and have a house, and so then all of a sudden they became born-again Christians. And now they pray for God to give them, you know, bless our home and bless our family. So they use religion as a way to protect their stuff. And then their whole ego becomes about that, right? So when you go through this transformation, you lose all your connection to the idea of what, you know, your security is. You lose your ego identification with religion. And then once your religion is destroyed, you don't know who you are anymore. And so who am I? You know, I was a Christian, and God, I'm this, and I'm a good, whatever your religion is. Or I'm an atheist. It doesn't matter. It's the same thing. And then we get to the point where now our ability to intend our reality becomes really shaken up. Because now we're in the the southeast, which is the dwarf home. The dwarf home is the realm of the emotional beings, the realm of the subconscious mind, the ability to intend our reality. And when we don't know who we are, it's difficult to know what to intend, because our intention, we only intend things for ourselves. You know, I want a house, I want a wife, I want kids, whatever it is you want. That's what you're trying to intend your reality. And we all create our reality. All of us do. I don't care who you are. Your intention creates your reality. You're from your subconscious mind. So if we don't know who we are, we don't know what we're supposed to intend. So our subconscious mind, our ability to intend, our emotional being as well explodes. Thor steps on that. So that's, let me see, 1, 2, 3. We're now, he's gone 4 steps. So then Thor steps forward one more time, and he steps on the realm of the south. That's the realm of the fire home. Fire home is the realm of Surt, which is, as you know, is the force of entropy, the force of chaos. But it represents our actions. So the planet Mars is also in the south, so it represents our force of will against our external universe. And so when all of these things happen, when we've lost our security, we've lost our religion, we've lost our identity, we've lost our ability to intend our reality, we don't know what to do. So our actions, the realm of our actions gets destroyed. We don't know what to do anymore. That feels like, that's when you really feel like you're giving up, when I just don't know what to do. And we go through that period of indecision, of real confusion. So when we don't know what to do, then what happens is, because Mars is also the warrior, so we lose our defenses. So we defend ourselves through our actions. By the way, this is important. When you talk about people acting out, what they're doing is they are trying to defend something that is really threatened. You know, this is what warfare is. When last case, scenario that the enemy is coming and they're going to steal your cave or your home or your wife or your stuff or your cows or whatever it is you're trying to defend, after the negotiation doesn't work, you go to war. You're trying desperately to defend something that you might lose. So when you lose that ability, guess what happens? Then all of your nightmares come out, which is, we're now into the realm of the southwest, which is what home? The realm of the underworld. And what does the underworld contain? It contains all of our unconscious issues. So as you know, as I've said, we try all of these things to make our lives better, but for some reason there's just some things that we have difficulty fixing or changing, or some habits we can't stop, or some self-destructive whatever. This is because there's something happening in our unconscious mind. Now, the unconscious mind is the 90% of your mind that you are unconscious of, that you are not aware of. So what ends up happening when we lose our ability to defend ourselves, then the unconscious is let loose. So all of our fears come to the surface. And this is when we have the nightmares. Again, this is, when people take hallucinogens, they can have a good or a bad trip. And a bad trip is nothing more than all of their unconscious issues coming up to the surface. They have, nightmares or whatever. But also people, if they're under the influence, can actually kill themselves. Jump off of roofs, or slit their throat or something like that, because they don't know what's real and what's imagined anymore. So this is actually good, because in order for us to evolve, all of our unconscious limitations, our self-sabotage, our fears, our illusions, our attachments, our unfulfillable desires, those desires, our obsessions, those have to get destroyed. We have to let go of them. And this is probably the worst death of all, because this is where we really hold on. By the way, this is why I teach ritual. It's great to want to be a spiritual person. It's great to want to read books. It's great to want to go and sing songs. But you have to do ritual if you want to change on an unconscious level. This is why our ancestors did so much ritual. Like blood sacrifices. Sacrificing a goat or a cow or a sheep or whatever. That's, first off, those things were really, really valuable to them. But it represented giving up something of value to the gods so that the gods could come and grant your requests. Well, what's really happening, because the gods are you, the gods are all within you anyway. What's really happening is that ritual of any sort, if you take it seriously, the symbols of that ritual are taken seriously by your unconscious mind, then you shift on the deepest level possible. So this is again why I teach this Thunder Shamanism course, and why I go through, I tell you specifically, all the kinds of rituals that you can do and all the different kinds of meditations. And when you mix all this stuff together, when you do Qigong and ritual and mantra work and visualization, now you're doing the real power of a shaman. And a lot of people want to pick and choose and do little bits. And listen, do whatever is comfortable for you. I'm not telling you what to do. But if you really want to transform, you can use all of these things together. And when you use them all together, the combined power of all of them is beyond your wildest imagination. That's my experience anyway. So that's what this, that's what this DVD here is really all about. You can go on to my YouTube channel. Again, let me just make the announcement again. If you're watching this, please, for your sake, go on to the thunderwizard.com YouTube channel. Go to the YouTube channel and binge watch my videos, because I talk about all this stuff in depth. And then if you really want to learn it and practice it, go to thunderwizard.com website and sign up at the, I forget which level it is, the second or third level. So then you can get all of the videos every month. And it's cheap. It's worth it. Trust me, it's worth it. Okay, so yeah, so that's the underworld. And like I said, that's pivotal. Once you get past the underworld, then we don't have as much. By then the death that we experience is not really as intense. But that's going to be the worst one. Having your unconscious mind, having life force energy go in there and blow open your unconscious mind. But what it does is, this is what demon fighting is, by the way. I used to talk about spirit fighting, that the celestial Qigong is based on a practice that I was taught called spirit fighting, which really was an energetic practice that was so intense that you could go and fight a disembodied spirit with your bare hands. And the reason why is because a disembodied spirit, whether it's a demon or a ghost, is really just unresolved unconscious issues, either from a human being or from some kind of spirit being. That's why they're demons. That's why they're so destructive, because they represent the worst parts of our unconscious. And so the spirit fighter would go and literally with their hands fight them. And you can't do that with your body. You can only do that with very, very high vibrational level of life force energy. And at the highest levels, people of spirit fighting, people would die. You'd get, the way you knew you mastered a certain form was that when you get to the end of it, you can't breathe and you pass out and you die for a few seconds. And then you have a vision and you come back to life, and then you have all kinds of crazy powers that you didn't have before. So again, we're talking about this idea of death and resurrection. And when you use the spirit fighting and you're not fighting against any kind of entity, then what you're doing is you're fighting against your own limitations. But what used to happen to me is when I was practicing like 4 hours a day and all kinds of crazy stuff was going on in my life, I had all kinds of crazy powers. But what would happen is at the end of during those 4 hours, I would feel elated because the amount of energy and the speed. I mean, it was like you couldn't even watch. It's like a blur. But then when I was done, I would then all of a sudden feel all of my old stuff, my unresolved issues coming to the surface, and I would curl up into a ball and just to get through it, and sit in the fetal position until the feelings had passed. And then I would feel this huge amount of energy, and I would feel like I almost didn't exist. And there was a period of time where I lived in L.A. I live in L.A. now, but a different part of L.A. And I would walk around, and it was like I was sort of like this zombie. I didn't have any real connection to my feelings or to other people, and people were sort of these these glistening things that were walking around, and it was just a really weird thing to do. But point being is that when you have that much life force energy going through you, when you experience that death and you get to the other side of that death, the energy that is available to you is unbelievable. But we have to go through that. So this is what's happening in this shamanic initiation. Thor destroys negativity, and when he steps on all of the 9 worlds, the 9 aspects of you, you're transformed. Okay, so we'll do a little bit of ads, and then I will see if there are any questions. Okay, so let me see if there are any questions here that I can answer here. So Lamprey asks, wait, so there is a negative impact of taking psychedelics? Yeah, there is a negative impact. The negative impact is this. Psychedelics are mimicking true life force energy work. When you do life force energy work of a high level, what ends up happening is that not only do you open all the meridians, all the normal healthy stuff, but at the really high levels, the glands of the brain open. The pineal and the pituitary gland open, and they start to secrete DMT and a bunch of other things as well. But it's done naturally. So what a lot of people may not know is that the 2 traditions that we know of today that are masters of this are the Vedic, the yogic tradition, and the Taoist tradition, the Chinese tradition. Both of these traditions, when you dig really deep, you find some very, very powerful energy work. And what they will tell you is that thousands of years ago, the masters used to take psychedelics. They would take plant teachers in order to have experiences, and maybe on one of these trips they found out, or they were taught, how to do it without having to use external substances. And the reason for that is that when you can do it naturally, you don't need to take the external substances anymore. The external substances, what they do is they take the glands of the brain and literally squeeze them like sponges, and it forces them to secrete, or puts into the body these secretions, and then your whole glandular system has to shut down. And this is why people get addicted. This is why it can be really hard on the brain and the body. It blows open the chakras. So you have this really powerful experience, but you also can't control it. And you don't know if you're experiencing your own unconscious issues or if you're having a real experience. This is one of the things. So it does have a very negative effect. I'm not here to tell people what to do. I don't care what they do or don't do. But I can tell you from personal experience that when you do it with these techniques that don't demand anything other than just using life force energy, the high that you get and the depth that you go, the intensity of the experience and the power is far beyond anything that any physical chemical can give you, any external chemical, whether it's a drug or whether it's a natural plant. So that is why I recommend it. So I saw that somebody said they didn't know how to get started. The way to get started is to go to qigong.thunderwizard.com, qigong.thunderwizard.com, and get this, either the streaming version or get the DVD of Celestial Qigong. That is something that was created from the spirit fighting that I was just talking about earlier. It's the highest level of energy work that I've ever experienced in my life. I've taught this to people who are master energy workers, Qigong workers, Tai Chi workers, and I have taught them this, and they've universally, all of them have said that this was far more powerful than anything they'd ever experienced. Some of them had experiences with light beings and all kinds of stuff. I'm not making that promise. I'm just saying what people have told me. And it comes back to this idea of destroying negativity. Because in order to destroy negativity, you have to have a huge amount of energy. And in order to have a huge amount of energy, you have to be not so much yourself. You have to die to your ideas of who you are and, become lighter, become less dense. The more you say, I am this, I do that, I have this, I defend this, I do that, this is mine, and how dare you, and I have a blah, blah, blah. The more that you connect to that, the denser you become. Nothing wrong with it, but then you become more solid. So in order to become less solid and have more room for the energy, you have to become less. So you could spend thousands and thousands of years in meditation trying to get rid of your ego, or you can use a cheat, which is what Celestial Qigong is. It's a cheat. It's a what's the word I want to look for? I mean, it's a tool that actually is like, it's the closest thing to taking a drug and getting there. It's a cheat. You learn these little cheats in the game. What it is, whenever you're doing certain movements, combined with facing a certain direction and all that, or just the postures and just all the stuff that I teach, it immediately taps you into these switches that are in your body that are left dormant. Look, there's a reason why at 54 years of age, people don't know how old I am. I mean, some people can guess, but a lot of people don't. Some people think I'm in my 30s. Some people don't know how old I am. But that's because I did this stuff for a really long time. And of course, I didn't do things like drink and smoke and all that kind of stuff for, at least, once I got to be an adult, I stopped doing all that. So anyway, to answer your question, you were asking about that. Go to qigong.thunderwizard.com and get started. You can also go onto the channel and just on the thunderwizard.com channel and start doing the Qigong I have there. Okay, so let's see here. Let's see. All right, looking for the questions. Yeah, so Lamprey, yeah, if you end up doing the Celestial Qigong, do the Celestial Qigong for a couple of years. Stop smoking if you smoke. Stop drinking if you drink. Eat healthy food. Don't take your life too seriously. Do these exercises and then compare them. Because I can tell you absolutely from my experience, because I've done both, there is no comparison. The difference is when you do external chemicals or power plants, it's like getting things on credit. You might get it for a little while. You can get an immediate benefit from it, but you're automatically in debt. Energetically and physically, you're in debt, and then you're going to have to pay it back with interest. When you do energy work without any of the external stimulus, you're going to pay, but it's going to be from your emotional perspective. You're going to pay all of the stuff, all the self-destructive stuff. The other thing that people don't know and they're not going to want to hear is that when you do external chemicals, you actually, some people, like I said, if they do it once under the guidance of a shaman and it's a one-time thing in their life, in order to have an experience, it can free them up. But when you do it repeatedly, what ends up happening is that your unconscious issues get cemented. And so you have this false experience of having enlightenment, crying and whatever, but it's not a true experience. Your true self-destructive things are still there. They're locked away. They're even deeper now. So that, again, I know a lot of people don't want to hear it, but that's my experience. And ultimately, the bottom line is it's bad for your health. I mean, I don't care what it is. We can talk about how, ayahuasca is a medicine. And I know that it has been a medicine and for a lot of people. But I also know it's also screwed a lot of people up, and a lot of people have died because of it. You never hear of people dying from Qigong. You never hear that. Oh, he did too much Qigong, he died. You never hear that. Okay, so enough about that. I know a lot of people don't want to hear that, but my job is to tell you the truth, and I'm going to do that. What is it about the unconscious that we need to release? Well, specifically, that's for you to find out. They call it unconscious for a reason. You're not aware of it. So people say, oh yeah, I know what all my problems are. Listen, that's why they call it unconscious. You don't know what unconscious stuff you have until it comes into your conscious awareness. For instance, I mean, I don't know how old you are, but I'm 54, so I've been alive for a while. I've been doing a lot of work on myself. So I've become aware of a lot of unconscious issues that I've had. One of them is, all men do this to some degree. My first wife was basically my mother. My mother was not, my mother was, my mother was my mother. But I ended up marrying somebody that was a lot like my mother. That was unconscious. I didn't realize that's what I was doing, but that's what I was doing. So you don't know what you know until you know it. And there's another good phrase for what the unconscious is. You don't know what you don't know, right? So that's, again, another thing I would say about these practices. Until you do them, you don't know what they are. So you can think about what I think they might be, but until you do them, you don't know what you don't know. So I don't know if I answered your question. Let's see. Great. All right. So that's it for the questions as far as I can see. So let's keep going. So we've got through all the first, how many worlds? Let's check and see. We've gotten through all the first 6 worlds. It's interesting when we do the spell of the 9 knots. Which again, if you're coming into this late, the spell of the 9 knots is one way that we can actively take the 9 steps that Thor takes when he destroys Jormungandr, which is limitation. And when we get to number 6, the chant is 6. My words are fixed. And that is you're facing the southwest and you're touching your lips. And it's there to remind us that there's no such thing as an idle word. Everything that we speak into existence, whether we're joking or serious, by the way, that's where, you've heard the term Freudian slip. We speak our unconscious all the time. This is one of the things I do when I'm working with students, and I will ask them questions. Sometimes I'm just asking them questions so they'll start talking. Because once they start talking, I'm going to hear what's going on in their unconscious mind. And so you don't realize that we are fixing our world with our speech. Now, our speech is not just what comes out of our mouth, it's also the self-talk that's going on all the time in our head. Because we're always saying to ourselves, I'm this, I'm that, the world is that, those people are this is that, that's that. Either we're angry or we're happy, it doesn't matter. We're fixing into place our world, and that gets stuck, literally like cemented into place into our unconscious mind. So anyway, I thought that was very interesting. So we move on to the seventh world, which is the Wain's home. So this, I like this because when we, in the spell of the 9 knots, when we get to the west, we say 7 by the stars of heaven, and we touch the solar plexus. Again, the solar plexus is beneath the heart and above the navel. It's not the heart or the navel, it's between. And this is where we open up the world of the Vanir, because the seventh world is about expression. So when we get to the west, we're talking about how we give to others. So the solar plexus is literally a place in our body. It's a little chakra right here that that projects solar energy. It projects our solar energy out into our environment. So I like this because this is where we get past all of the the blockages, and we're really starting to make some real headway here. This is why there are 7 chakras. Again, these numbers don't line up for nothing. So the realm of the West on one level represents working through all of your 7 chakras and achieving emotional maturity so that you know how to give freely without wanting anything back. And again, let's take a look at one of the runes that is here directly opposite the east in the western world of the Wain's home. What is the first one there? It's Gebo, which is equal and opposite flow of energy. So that's when you give without any expectation. This is the biggest thing I run into when I'm talking with people who are wanting relationship advice. It's usually just one person, and the woman will say, well, my boyfriend this or my husband that, and he does this, and I just wish he did that differently, and I wish he was like that. And I'll stop and I'll say, so you want him to change? And they'll say yes. And I said, and then I'll say, so is it a deal breaker for you if they don't change in this level? And they'll say things like, well, yes, he needs to be more mature, or he needs to be more, and they'll have some judgment attached to how this person should be. And I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but that judgment is just that, it's a judgment. And then I'll help them understand that it doesn't work that way. If you want to be with this person, you have to accept them exactly as they are, and you have to expect that they will never change. Because if you expect them to change, you're only going to be, then whenever you give, you're always going to be giving with an expectation, and you're always going to be giving with resentment. You ever been in those relationships? I have. Where either you or your partner, they're always resentful. And if they give you something or do something for you, there's always a string attached, and there's always a resentment. And, well, I did this for you yesterday, and, that's no place to be. So it's just in your own best interest to just give things freely. And if you don't get anything back, then do it for the sake of doing it. Otherwise, it's not really a relationship. So when we've got to the 7th world, we've worked through all of the issues of the 7 chakras emotionally. And this is why it's 7 by the stars of heaven, which is the Big Dipper, which is the Big Dipper. I could get into it, but it can be used in all kinds of meditations for all kinds of luck and power and all kinds of good things like that. So that's the Wain's home. So then we get past the 7 chakras and we move up. We move beyond that to the realm of the ancestors. And on the physical body, when we're doing the points, we get to, we get to here. We get to the throat. So what is the throat about? The throat is about communication. So this is where we receive communication from the ancestors. So where do the ancestors live in the Northwest? Those are the ancestral masters. Those are the ascended masters, the ethereal masters. I don't care what word, the guardian angels. I don't care what word you want to use. When we get to this level, if we're going through this initiation, so again, this initiation is the 9 steps of Thor. As he destroys whatever is limiting you in your life, you go through a death on all of these levels. So I sort of shared like a death of what it would like to be to get to the next level in your relationship, which would be to completely accept. I mean, everybody listening to me who's in a relationship, honestly answer the question, can you accept your partner exactly as they are? No changes. And stay committed to them for the rest of your life. When you can say that honestly, then you have allowed yourself, and you know, if you've ever been there, you know that that is not an easy thing to do. That's very difficult to do. You have to give up your desires to that degree. And I'm not saying, and listen, I'm the first one, whenever I work with people, I'm the first one to tell somebody it's time to leave. This person is not going to give you what you want. Because if I can find out from the person whether or not this is something they're willing to give on or whether this is a deal breaker, I will be completely honest with them and say, listen, you can't do it. And you shouldn't. You should be happy. This person will not make you happy. You need to leave. But sometimes you get to those places where you do find that one person. And there's going to be that one thing that will feel like a death that you're going to have to learn to accept. And accept them exactly as they are. I can guarantee you that. It will happen. So then, what does that mean when we're talking about the ancestral masters? When we get to a certain point where we have learned all that we can learn in our current state of awareness, the ancestral masters will demand that we grow. And what we will experience, and sometimes this is, anyway, again, I have to talk with somebody one-on-one to be able to find out for myself which one of these two things we're talking about. Sometimes people think that the ancestral masters aren't talking to them, and the only thing that's happening is that they're unconsciously blocking themselves from hearing. But another thing can happen is that the ancestral masters will energetically say, it's time to move on. You got to grow. We're not going, you know, it's almost like, you know, we're not going to teach you anymore until you're ready to grow. I'm not speaking for them right now. I'm trying to put into words as best I can, because I'm not going to speak for them about that. I don't want to use my limited human speech to destroy or, minimize that. But they definitely will. But see, the thing about the ancestral masters is that they don't come and force anything on anybody. It's you have to want to do it. And they will do as much as they can to let you know that, hey, you're at a karmic end here. You have to move past this. And at that point, when you ask, they will help you. And then it will feel to you as though that world, that connection is being destroyed. But it's actually moving up to the next level. So, and then we get to the 9th world, which is the center. And so what that means is that when we have gone through this initiation on all of these worlds, on all of these levels, when Thor, the force of life force energy, the force of evolution of the human mind, has destroyed the last vestiges of limitation, and we go through this shamanic experience on all these 8 levels, then the 9th level, which is our soul then gets to move up to the next level, whatever that is, within ourselves. We could see that as a physical death. There are many traditions where the master, as he's gone through the meditative process and has broken through all of these things, there's legends of masters in caves, and when they finally reach enlightenment, their body shifts. And everything in their being, all of their cells shift to the next level, and they phase out of this existence here. and they live on another in another dimension. And the only thing that's left is clothes and hair and fingernails. And so there's a lot of legends. You know, my teachers told me about legends where, you know, there was somebody in our lineage who was the master of such and such, and you know, there's a person that'll be there who serves them. You know, the apprentice, and the apprentice will come every day and brush off, you know, the dust on the body to make sure that, you know, whatever, that the body is intact. And then they come one day and there's nothing left. There's just a pile of clothes with hair and fingernails. It's the only thing left. And then they have shifted on to the next dimension. Now, whether that's true or not, I don't know. I know that I've experienced things that can't be possible. So I'm open to that. I also know that sometimes these are just myths to help us understand. So this is a symbol of what happens when we've gone through all of these 8 shamanic shifts. All of the external 8 worlds have been destroyed and are being recreated. And then the middle part, our soul, which is really the only thing that's really us. The soul then gets to shift into that next level of being, where it's no longer who it was before. It gets to experience its true nature, which is infinite. So that's my take on why in the myths did, after Thor killed Jormungandr, why did he take 9 steps before he died? Because, as I'm saying here, there is this constant battle between limitation and expansion. And that the force of life, force energy, always wins. And when it happens, when that final aspect of limitation is destroyed, then Thor takes 9 steps. Life force energy goes into all of the 9 chakras in the body, goes into the 9 worlds, the 9 aspects of the human being, you know, whichever way you want to look at it. And life force energy will destroy them so that they can be recreated to the next level of existence. So ascension is not necessarily an easy process. There's all kinds of talk out there about ascension and all that, and you know, it can be really easy to be lulled into, you know, wanting to have the easier, softer, more beautiful way. Hey, if you can get it, my hat's off to you. I'm built this way. Not everybody's built the way I am, but I'm built this way that when I go through changes, you know, this is what happens. I go through these experiences where my whole universe comes just crashing down all around me. But I always come out the other side with more power. And I'm saying that instead of letting this happen to us, because it will happen to us, shifts are happening, energetic shifts are happening to this world. That is not just a cute idea. That is, you know, more so than I've ever seen in my life. Major, major energetic shifts. We have tools that we can use. I've mentioned a few of them here. I recommend getting Celestial Qigong. That is the most powerful energy force practice in the world, in my experience. Maybe there's other out there. In my experience, this is the most powerful in the world. You can get that by going to qigong.thunderwizard.com. I have also here, if you want to do like a little mini Ragnarok for yourself, then I have the Spell of the 9 Knots DVD. I think it has a different cover than that, but anyway, that's the name of it. And there's all kinds of other things. There's books and stuff like that. And if you want to learn how to do this, you can work with me You can work with me on video. I have videos on thunderwizard.com, and you can subscribe there and learn from those in-depth videos. I start from the very bottom, the very basics, where I teach you how to create a thunder wheel, this 9-world wheel that we've been talking about for ritual. And I teach you how to empower that. I teach you how to use that in rituals. I also teach you that in the Spell of the 9 Knots. If you want to work with me directly, a lot of people do. And even though I prefer to just, go surf all day and just do my own thing, I do have a practice where I work with people one-on-one. And you can go to thunderwizard.com and see the different levels where you can work with me directly. And I do recommend it for people who are going through a shamanic initiation, because it's really difficult to do this on your own. It is really, and it's so much more helpful when you've got somebody who's been through it and who can help you identify what's happening with you. I also recommend getting an astrological reading, a Vedic astrological reading. Go to astrology.thunderwizard.com. I'll be able to, at the very least, be able to show you how you can use the energies that are there working with you. Like, everybody's got different energetic strengths. I'll give you an example. In my chart, the most beneficial planet for me is Mars, which is why I so much identify with the warrior. That, if I stopped working with Mars, I can tell you this for a fact. If I stopped working with Mars, my whole life would, my whole being, my body would come apart. I would literally be crumbled by the force of the stuff I'm having to go through in my life. So Mars is seen as one of the malefic planets. And for some people, Mars is the worst thing. For some people, Mars can cause disease. It can cause death and accidents. So for some people, Mars is the last planet you want to work with. For some people, they need to work with Venus. For some people, it's Sun. For others, it's Jupiter. Jupiter is supposed to be one of the most benefic planets. If I don't work with Jupiter because of where Jupiter is placed in my chart, Jupiter will definitely give me enlightenment and awareness in the most dramatic and difficult, challenging ways possible. So I steer clear of Jupiter most of the time. So this is important stuff to know. And there was a time when we had people, wizards, shamans, who you could go to help you with these things. So I'm doing my best to try and not only help people on a one-on-one basis, but I'm also here to give you guys these tools so that you can become those shamans, those healers. And I can also tell you that nobody that works with me escapes personal transformation. Everybody that works with me, everybody that has worked with me, if you can talk to them, will tell you, just by working with me, your life will transform. I will do my best to try and make it as easy and as smooth a transition as possible. I try to be as accepting and non-judgmental as possible, because the energy itself is just intense enough. So I try to be a calming influence. So whether you work with me or whether you work with somebody else, or regardless of what you do, this is what's coming. It's already happening. We are reaching a tipping point. It doesn't matter where you look. Even if you just look at the human race. The human race has evolved to the point where, really we cannot expand much further on this planet and continue to use the resources in the way that we are without something breaking. So we might be creating a Ragnarok, very literally. We just had the most powerful hurricanes in recorded history, and we're not done. There's a couple more on the way. Never seen anything like this. Did you see that storm that went through? It came through the Caribbean and went straight up the entire state of Florida. It was bigger than the state of Florida and just leveled it. Never seen anything like that in my life. So Ragnarok is coming. Maybe it's here. And we need all the tools that we can get to be able to do that. And the one thing, we may not have the ability to stop the hurricanes, but the one thing that we do have control over is making the decision to work directly with this life force energy as it is shifting. And that is what Thor is doing. Thor will kill Jormungandr. He will expand beyond the abilities of that limitation, and he will destroy that. And when he does, he will step on all of our 9 worlds, and we will go through that expansion, that destruction as well. If we are working together with him, then we can experience that, we can see it coming, and we can actually experience, maybe it'll be an exhilarating experience. So anyway, I'm not trying to put any gloom and doom on anything, but that is, that's what Thor wants us to know. So that's it for now in terms of the teaching. I'll check and see if there are any questions, and if so, I will answer. If not, then we will call it a night. So let me see here. I'm not. There's 19 people on. Looking for a question. I think I've already seen all these. Okay, so that's it in terms of questions. I don't see any more questions. So I am going to do last little bit of ads here. So again, if you want to work with me personally, go to thunderwizard.com. Subscribe at whatever level you want. If you want a Vedic astrological reading, by the way, people who work with me at the what level it is, the initiate level or something like that, you can read it. You automatically get a Vedic astrological reading, which is now the price has gone up, and you get a North Star Shamanic reading, because that gives me the ability to then continue to work with you. If you want a Vedic astrological reading on its own, go to astrology.thunderwizard.com. If you want to learn how to harness this very high vibrational frequency of energy which is coming, which is already here, go to qigong.thunderwizard.com. If you want a 9-world rune reading, this is also something I give my apprentices, but if you want to just have me give you one, go to runereadings.thunderwizard.com. That is a really powerful snapshot to see what's, sometimes I can take a look at your 9 worlds and see which ones are getting blown apart and where you're at and all that. So go to runereadings.thunderwizard.com. Anyway, I'll be back in a little bit, and then I'll see if I have some closing comment for today. Okay, so I did see, I think one question popped up here. Emerson's Coffee, Bike, and Rum Shop says, can you do more than one spell of the 9 knots? Yeah. I don't recommend doing more than one intention per spell. But yeah, of course you can. I mean, look, it's going to happen anyway. These evolutions are going to happen, and you know, like I said, we can choose to get ahead of that process. You know, to give you an example, the spirit fighting, when it was done before I got pulled off of, at least according to what I was told, it was on one of the sacred mountains in China, and blah blah blah, and then they had to leave the mountain, and it was brought down and taught to a very limited number of people, and then it got out, and I'm one of those people that wasn't supposed to learn it, and blah blah blah. But these guys would work and practice and put themselves through so much, and physically they would do it trying to have that death occur. You know, they would push themselves to get ahead of it. That's why people used to live up in monasteries in the mountains, because, you know, when you're living down here and you have to have a job and you've got wife and kids and you have to pay a mortgage and you have to deal with people and landlords and go to, you know, grocery stores, and, you know, when you're at that level, it's like humans are, it's just this, it's really uncomfortable. So you had to put yourself in some place where you didn't have to deal with it. But the point of that is that they would push themselves past their comfort point. And so, listen, I've tried over the years, I've tried watering down these teachings. And I've never been able to take that transformative aspect out of it. I just haven't. So, you know, I've now chosen to accept that and to take responsibility for it, and to just know that when I teach it, that that's what's going to happen. So, yes, you can do more than one spell of the 9 nuts. You know, again, when you're dealing with the 9 nuts, just know what it is that you're doing. Be clear about what it is that you want, and just be prepared, you know, be prepared for, be careful what you ask for, you know, that kind of thing. But in order to get to where, listen, if you're a true shaman, if you're called to this shamanic path, what will happen is you will get to a point where you just simply can't stand being where you are anymore. And, you know, this is why shamans always felt like they were going crazy. You know, they want to end their life, or they feel like they're dying, or, you know, just they go crazy. You have to grow. You know, this is a path that, you know, people are called to, whether they like it or not. And when you're at that point where, you know that you're not gonna, you just can't stand staying the same, and you have to change. You don't do it because you think it's a good idea. You do it because you don't have any other choice. And you know that you have to walk through that dark path of transformation. But there, you know, going that direction, there's just nothing there. So you might as well just get ahead of it. What ends up happening is it sometimes does get easier, you know, and you learn how to enjoy it. You know, I got to the point where I had to go out and practice every night for 4 hours, because if I didn't, I just wasn't comfortable. Anyway, so that's it. I think those are all the questions. I think I've said everything there is to be said. I've made all of my pitches. So, my friends, thank you for the opportunity. But, you know, one thing you can do for me is to meditate and intend that this channel blows up and goes viral. I would love to see the initial level of people that come into the thunderwizard.com subscription page at the lower level where they get the videos. I would love to see that go up to 250, but even beyond that. I personally want to get into a new space where I can have more space to do my stuff, where I can do live Qigong demonstrations, and for that I need more space and more stuff, and ritual demonstrations, you know, where I can have fires and all that kind of stuff. I want to get to that point where we can do that, where we can do stuff together as a community live, you know, internationally. That would be a lot of fun. So start putting that out there for me, so that that can happen. So that won't happen unless I have the resources to do it. So if you would, lock horns with me and let's see if we can manifest that. Yeah, continue to, well wishings from you guys are helpful. I'm okay today, but I am going through some major stuff in my life. like I've never gone through in my previous 54 years of existence. So your well wishings and your good thoughts for me are very helpful, and I appreciate that. And I am asking for that from you. So, my friends, that's it for now. Until next time, may the power of the God of life force energy be with you, and may you ride his slipstream as he goes through his path of expansion and evolution for all of the universe. So that's it. Until next time. Thank you, my friends.